Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Justin Perl, and I'm a litigation director here at Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid. In addition to our team here at Legal Aid, we are joined in this lawsuit by the ACLU of Minnesota, who is partnering with us. And its representative today is Clare Diegel, who will also be speaking to you from that fine organization. After Clare and I speak, we will have two of our clients who are with us today, Dr. Bilal Murad, president of the nonprofit organization ZACAH, as well as Patrick Berry, who will tell you his story about being kicked out of one of our public parks during an encampment sweep. So just a brief rundown of what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a bit about this class action lawsuit that was started this morning. We filed it in federal district court in Minneapolis. Clare will then elaborate on the rights that have been and continue to be violated. Mr. Berry, our individual client, will tell you what the experience was like to be swept out of that camp and how it has impacted his life. And finally, Dr. Murad will speak, and he will tell you how the encampment sweeps are detrimentally impacting the mission of his organization, ZACAH. When we are done, we will be happy to take some questions. So first, let me tell you about the basis of the lawsuit. As you have probably read and heard over the summer, and many of you have probably reported on, the city, the county, and various law enforcement agencies have been conducting sweeps of homeless encampments, forcibly displacing Hennepin County residents who often have nowhere else to go and destroying their homes and their personal belongings in the process. We are seeking, by way of this lawsuit, an immediate temporary restraining order of that misconduct, and later a permanent injunction to stop these illegal and unconstitutional sweeps. Now, the complaint itself asserts legal claims. It asserts violations of our clients' rights to be free from unreasonable seizures under the federal and state constitutions. It asserts violations of the right to privacy under the 4th Amendment. It asserts a violation of due process as required by the 14th Amendment. And it alleges that the defendants have committed conversion by destroying their belongings, our clients' belongings. But in a nutshell, this case is about being evicted from one's home. Instead of following the law, these indiscriminate and constant encampment sweeps are done without notice, without providing shelter space, and without adequate and permanent housing in our community. So we bring this lawsuit to address that cycle of homelessness and to stop the cruel treatment of our most vulnerable residents. They should not be viewed as disposable, tossed out of the parks while the city, the county, and the park board and their authorities bulldoze their belongings and throw nearly everything our clients own into dumpsters. We are, or at least we should be, better than that. Why did we bring this lawsuit? Well, there are over 3,000 unhoused individuals in the Twin Cities. There are over 300 of them living in tents in public parks because they have nowhere else to go. The shelters are often full, and people get turned away from them even when they do make an attempt to try to get in there. And of course, the shelters, if they could get in, are dangerous due to COVID. As we all know, we're also in the midst of an affordable housing crisis. That's why one of our 7 individual clients, Joel Westvig, is living in BF Nelson Park because he's been waiting on a wait list for 5 years for public housing. We have 7 individuals who have joined up to speak truth to power. Some have been homeless for many years, and others for just the first time this spring when the pandemic hit. They are standing up for themselves and for hundreds of others like them who were ejected from our public parks. For instance, our client Emmett Williams lost his job this spring while working at Target Center because the pandemic hit and he was rendered homeless for the first time in his life. He's living at MLK Park and is in fear of his life if he is evicted again after being tossed from Powderhorn Park earlier without any notice. Another client, Henrietta Brown, was rousted from her tent at 4 in the morning in the pouring rain by police officers who were shaking her tent, shining bright lights in her face, and yelling that she had 30 minutes to get out. So she grabbed her blanket, she grabbed her purse, but when Ms. Brown told the deputy sheriff that she needed a little more time to grab her important papers, what happened? She was threatened with arrest. As a result, she lost her birth certificate, she lost her identification card, and she lost very sentimental photos of her family. That is not how we should treat anyone, let alone the most vulnerable in our community, people who have nowhere else to go as winter approaches. So that is why we brought this lawsuit, to stop this despicable behavior and require the city and the county and the park board and its authorities to implement a plan to save these people from more harm and more chaos. I'll turn it over to Ms. Diegel, who will elaborate on the constitutional issues presented in this case, the rights that have been violated, and the failure of the city and county and park board to act appropriately. Thank you. Claire?
Thank you, Justin. I'm Clare Diegel, and I'm a staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union of Minnesota. The fact is, our shelters do not have space to house people experiencing homelessness, and our severe housing shortage makes finding a permanent place to live nearly impossible for our most vulnerable residents. COVID-19 has, of course, made this situation even worse. It's led to job loss, more financial difficulties, and even more housing shortages. And that's why hundreds of people, individuals, and even families started seeking shelter in our parks over the summer, rather than risk a potential COVID-19 infection in shelters. And it's why Governor Walz signed emergency orders recognizing that the sweeps and disbandments of encampments actually increases the potential risk and spread of COVID-19. The governor's order actually prohibited sweeping encampments unless the government could provide sufficient alternative shelter, or the encampment was a documented threat to people's health, safety, and security. And despite these orders from the governor, the officials from the city, the Parks Department in Hennepin County, including law enforcement, almost immediately started to enact plans to sweep the parks anyway. And when the sweeps are happening, the residents aren't getting enough warning. Sometimes they're not getting any warning. We've seen notices that officials have posted without any deadline or any timeline. Many times, encampment residents, including our own clients, didn't even know that law enforcement was coming at all. And when the officers arrive, they're showing up with bulldozers and pepper spray. And rather than inventory or store the property that they may find, they go in with bulldozers and destroy everything that they see. And they're doing it without warrants, and they're doing it without probable cause. They're simply throwing away people's property. Some of our clients who were there trying to gather family photos, trying to gather identification and even medication, were not only stopped from saving their property, they were actually threatened with arrest. And our Bill of Rights gives us the right to be free from unreasonable property seizures and to get adequate notice before the government takes away our property or forcibly removes us from our homes. The city, the parks, and the county have violated these rights. They're treating our homeless neighbors like second-class citizens. Now, we've seen in the past few months how the people of Minneapolis and organizations like ZACAH have donated countless hours and resources to fill the gap left by the government here. But it's not sustainable and it's not enough. So we're here today to stop the city and county from enacting these illegal, heartless policies of kicking hundreds of people out of encampments in the parks. The city and the county must stop upending people's lives, destroying their belongings, and failing to find them anywhere else to live. Tearing down people's homes and throwing away their only belongings with little or no notice is a shameful violation of their civil liberties. And that's why we filed the lawsuit today.
I believe next is Mr. Berry, so he will take my spot.
Hi, my name is Patrick Berry. I grew up in South Minneapolis, and I'm a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. I haven't always been an unhoused person. I studied business management in college. Then in the span of a year, both my parents died and I lost permanent housing. Over the summer, I lived in encampments in 3 different parks. Then I moved into the Powderhorn Park West encampment. On August 10th at 7 a.m., a friend woke me up to tell me that the police were clearing the park. I hadn't seen an eviction notice of any kind, and no one had been talking about one. The only city workers I had seen up to that point were park employees who were doing maintenance at the baseball diamond. When I went outside my tent that morning, I saw that police had made a perimeter around the top of the park with a yellow caution tape. The scene was pretty chaotic. There were bulldozers standing by, and I was trying to mobilize people together. A friend of mine, who the friend who had informed me of the eviction happening, got on a bullhorn and was yelling. The police put that individual in handcuffs, shoved them into a police car, and drove them away. I knew where their tent and belongings were, so I went and grabbed them to keep them safe. I also ran and grabbed my backpack. I didn't know where I was going to go, and I couldn't carry everything with me. So we only had a few minutes max to get our belongings. The bulldozers came and cleared everything. There was a dumpster in the park that was full of tents and other belongings. They threw away people's identification, family photos, their medication, the last vestiges of their personal lives. I lost my tent, sleeping mattress, and sleeping bags. People are already suffering so much out here, and the whole thing was just horrible and cruel. At some point during the park sweeps, the police started using chemical irritants against people. The people I saw them spraying were not being violent. Large numbers of people were being sprayed, and they were just peacefully protesting what was going on and asking that they, not clear unsheltered people from the parks. I saw friends of mine who hadn't crossed the yellow line get handcuffed, detained, and driven away. After police swept the Powderhorn Park camp, I spent 2 months in many different places, on a friend's couch, in a van, in a tent around the city, just wherever I put up a tent for the night. In a hotel for a few days, thanks to organizations like ZACAH. I haven't gone to a shelter because they're not safe. I've heard a lot of stories about people getting exploited or assaulted, and the shelters are crowded. The risk from COVID is very real when you're sleeping in a large indoor area, with many different cots inside of it. It's not very safe for COVID. And the waiting list for housing programs can take years and years and years. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have an apartment, thanks to help from ZACAH. So I'm taking part in this lawsuit because our elected officials need to start paying attention to the issue of homelessness. Why not put up simple public housing units on vacant public properties? Bring in social workers and medical providers. This is a humanitarian issue. People who are homeless are victims of socioeconomic despair as a result of policies put forth by the powerful. Some of the people who are homeless living in the parks are trying to go to college. They have their laptops and everything they own in a roller bag. Others lost their jobs due to COVID. Job loss is only going to get worse this winter. This could be you. It could be one of your family members. We know evictions are going to be increasing significantly. When the encampments opened, the people of Minneapolis sent air mattresses, food, water, and financial aid to help us. The city, whose job it is to take care of people, sent bulldozers and police with pepper spray. I don't feel the city's actions are representative of Minneapolis or the values its people hold dear. It's time our officials start taking this issue seriously and help people who are homeless, not try to bulldoze us away.
Thank you, Patrick. We'll now call upon Dr. Murad from ZACAH.
Thank you all. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Bilal Murad. I am the president of a Muslim-run, volunteer-run grassroots organization called ZACAH. We are grounded in the Islamic principle of social justice and equity for everyone in society. And that's what we've been striving for the last 6 years of our existence. For the last 6 years, ZACAH has been dedicated to working with residents of Minnesota, primarily immigrants and racial minorities, who are on the verge of losing their home and just need a little bit of financial support to return to stability. We have never sought funding from large philanthropic donors from the state as part of our fundamental belief in the principle of redistribution of wealth. We have an absolute obligation to our community members. Our neighbors, housed or unhoused, have a right to our support. To that end, ZACAH has helped our applicants with a car, a first month's rent and a deposit, childcare so the parents can work, food, or whatever was needed to keep them stable in a place of sustained living, to prevent homelessness. We also operate a transitional home for women and children. This summer, the crisis of unsheltered homelessness and the subsequent sweeps of our Minneapolis parks has completely shifted our focus. On June 9, 2020, when hundreds of unsheltered people seeking refuge at the former Sheraton Midtown Hotel were effectively evicted from the premises, ZACAH was contacted by volunteers from the Minneapolis Sanctuary Movement. 2 days later, we booked a hotel room for a young woman at Powderhorn West who was experiencing severe post-traumatic stress disorder at the park. A week later, I and a group of our physician colleagues began to volunteer at Powderhorn Park, offering free medical care to those in need. As a physician, I can tell you that there's one commonality between almost every single person in the park. It's not substance abuse, it's not unemployment, but an underlying health condition. I thought I would go and see a system that was fractured, but was able to guide individuals experiencing homelessness towards medical care that they desperately needed. But in fact, what I saw was there was no system at all. We started to provide some basic medical care and helped to link people with their providers for urgent needs. There is a reason the top public health officials in the country have recommended localities to not sweep encampments during this pandemic. When I returned to provide needed follow-up to these residents of parks, these included individuals with cancer, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, peripheral vascular disease, heart failure, bad infections, I couldn't find them. I was trying to make the connection between them and their providers and their healthcare systems, but they were nowhere to be found because the camps had been swept away. There is a non-zero chance that some of them have actually lost their lives or become seriously ill. In fact, there was a death of a young lady who died in front of a 13-year-old child in a hotel room. These are completely preventable deaths that will never be accounted for. One day we got a call from someone at the park in urgent need of a hotel. We spent several hours looking for a hotel that would accept third-party payment. I ended up finding a room for 3 families, all of whom now have many months later moved into permanent housing. Much has changed since that first day of June. In the last 3 months, ZACAH has paid and sponsored, with the generosity of our donors, over 2,000 nights in hotels for more than 500 people across half a dozen hotels in different cities. My wife Nahid and our fellow board members of ZACAH, along with the amazing dedicated group of volunteers of the Sanctuary Movement, spend at least 50 to 60 hours a week working with these volunteers and placing individuals from the parks and emergency hotel rooms. We have spent almost $115,000 for hotel rooms at the time that I'm reading this today. I want to be very clear. ZACAH is honored to have the trust of the community and its donors, and it's a privilege to be able to do this work on behalf of those in need. And we will do everything in our limited capacity for as long as is necessary. But here's the fundamental question that I am trying to grapple with. What is a justification for an organization of 7 volunteers, all of whom have full-time jobs, many of whom are physicians and health providers, doing the work the state clearly has the funding and capacity to do? We can and should be paying every dollar towards rent for our unhoused neighbors, not shelling money out to hotels because the state and county refuse to expand their hotel programs, leaving hundreds and hundreds behind. Our board and our volunteers have been working overtime, strategizing on how to make our money stretch, pull in more donations, increase our volunteer capacity. We have applied for state funding and were denied. During the COVID crisis, it is a government's responsibility to provide a concrete plan to make sure everyone has somewhere safe to stay through the winter. Not our responsibility as a small organization. What's more, the Minneapolis Park Board series of constant, sudden, and destructive evictions have left hundreds of residents with nowhere to go, resulting in the destruction of property, loss of community that is built at the parks, and crucially, the theft of psychological safety. This is a dehumanization. You and I know where we will sleep tonight in the comfort of our homes. Our days tomorrow will begin in the safety of our homes. A state that cannot provide that peace of mind to each of its citizens is an example of an abject failure. Nahid and I and other board members have sat in meetings and calls and have been thanked for our work by government officials. We don't need this gratitude. The politicians, the elected and administrative officials at every level of government who bear witness to this crisis, to the inhumanity of the evictions and the neglect of our neighbors, should really feel ashamed of the situation that we have been in and that we continue to witness year after year, and that this year has simply been magnified by COVID-19 and the riots following the murder of George Floyd. While ZACAH is trying to fill a gap left by government inaction, we are not sustained for this kind of work. The hundreds of thousands we are on track to spend on emergency hotels, a sum that is nothing to the government and everything to us, has diverted us from our core mission of getting and keeping our neighbors in permanent housing, for providing with some stability in their lives. Temporary emergency relief is meant as a transition, not an endpoint. We have made a commitment to spend the community's donations and our time to support individuals in moving from a place where they are losing hope to a place of stability. The fact that we are currently barred from doing everything we can to provide people with long-term housing because of our government's inaction on homelessness, a problem also due to their inaction, is a cruel irony. I simply refuse to believe as a healthcare professional that in the year 2020 in the United States of America, the most prosperous country in the world, that we don't have the ability or the resources to provide solutions to homelessness. It is a lack of political will, a lack that is immoral, it is unlawful, and it's lethal. We must stop this dehumanization of our brothers and sisters, and let's start by saving some lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murad. Thank you, ZACAH, not only for participating in this lawsuit, but for much more for helping the community. It's much appreciated. I believe we're able to take questions now, and I believe that's done through the chat. Is that correct? Yeah, via chat. So if there are questions, we'll be happy to try to field them. No problem, Mr. Featherly. Okay, let me answer the first question from Kevin Featherly, and this is Justin Perl again. This is not a real eviction case, is it? That's correct, in the sense that this is not a case brought in the Hennepin County Housing Court. This is a case alleging violations, constitutional violations, as well as violations of state law because of the unlawful ousters, if you will. Question from Miguel Otaro from the Star Tribune. There were already plans set in motion to relocate people currently in parks for the winter. Does this have any impact on those plans? I think what I'll do on this particular question is ask Clare to field it, but I can tell you that the shelter that is available, so far as we understand, is far too little and far too late. Clare?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I would echo that. And, you know, going to the question, does this have any impact on plans? We have been studying the shelter reports from Hennepin County. We saw what the city council did on Friday. There is not adequate space to house the number of people currently living outside. The park board estimated last week that there were 222 parks, 222 tents in Minneapolis parks. And the superintendent of the park board himself has recognized that there is inadequate shelter space available. And one larger problem is we're not only looking at shelter space, we're looking at affordable housing. Any emergency shelter space that could be provided, again, it's not right now, but if it could be provided, it's just a Band-Aid. The government needs to start investing in long-term solutions by providing permanent affordable housing.
Thank you, Claire. I'm going to follow up on Mr. Featherly's comment, which was that I had mentioned eviction. And that's true. I do believe this case is about evicting people from their homes, but I meant that in a generic sense. The next question from Mara Godfrey. Are you looking into filing a similar lawsuit in St. Paul over encampments in St. Paul? Well, all I can say is that this certainly impacts all of the Twin Cities, but at the moment we've commenced this action, and we'll take it a step at a time, and that's certainly a possibility, but I can't really answer further at this point. Mr. Featherly, what about the Supreme Court ruling that upheld the Ninth Circuit's ruling? That said that it was illegal to move people if the jurisdictions do not provide a place for the homeless to stay. Aren't the local jurisdictions violating the Supreme Court order already? It's not badly worded at all, I understand. You're referring to the Boise case, and I'm sure we'll be talking about the Boise case when we're in front of our court on the temporary restraining order. The reason that order does not directly impact, it's certainly relevant, but doesn't directly impact the case, is because that controlled the Ninth Circuit. And when the Supreme Court simply chose not to take the case. So the case is good law in the Ninth Circuit, and we believe is certainly instructive here, but not necessarily binding. Next question. We hope that filing the suit here influences other cities like St. Paul to do the right thing. Yeah, thank you, Lynette. Absolutely agree. We'll stand for another couple of minutes, but we really do appreciate your presence here today and your questions. So we have a question about the weather. And so I'll take a first shot, but I think Dr. Murad, I may pass this on to you. Have you weighed whether there is a negative health effect if people stay outdoors in the winter if a TRO is issued? One of the reasons we're bringing this matter is because the weather is getting worse, and we recognize that living outdoors may not be ideal, but what's worse is being shuffled like deck chairs in the Titanic from one park to another. And so at least what we're seeking here is some stability in the public parks. But Dr. Murad, if you have anything else to add with respect to that question, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Minnesota winter is brutal. The influenza season is coming in, and we know that about 32,000 people die every year in the United States alone from influenza. And with COVID-19 situation, the problem is going to be compounded. This is not a population that is getting tested, obviously, for COVID or even able to take precautions. So the idea of putting a stay order, for instance, is not so that they can spend the winter in the tents, but it's so that they are not being displaced continuously. Because if there was a plan to put them in a place of stability, there would not be a problem. But by displacing them continuously, you basically cut them off from their essential services and from their volunteer group. And then, and if there's any help that we can actually provide to them from medically also in any other way, we don't have access to these individuals then because they are lost to the radar. But ideally speaking, the idea is that keep them, don't displace them from where they are, and then find permanent housing for them, or at least temporary housing for them, which is warm and comfortable for them during the winter while we're trying to figure out a long-term solution for them. At least through the winter, we need to have a stable solution for them so that this population remains safe.
Thank you, Doctor. And I would like to add that we are seeking a temporary restraining order to prevent these constant sweeps. But if a restraining order is not issued for some reason, that doesn't mean these people are automatically housed. They're still outside, but then they have to find a place to go because they've been kicked out of their current home in the public park. So we at least believe it provides some temporary shelter in the public spaces. There have been, Mr. Featherly asked, there have been big settlements in Los Angeles. Are you looking for a settlement monetarily? Well, let me answer it this way. If one has their personal property bulldozed and thrown into a dumpster without any notice and without any policy allowed to get the personal property back, or without any ability to be compensated for the value of that property, that causes damages. So yes, we are seeking damages as well as the permanent injunction. Has a hearing been set? The papers were filed earlier today. The matter was assigned to Federal District Judge Wilhelmina Wright, and we don't yet have a hearing, and we expect one soon given the urgent situation. Lynette, should we, Lynette, what's our schedule? Should we close it down or wait a few minutes? Oh, there's another question. Sorry.
I think it's okay. If we want to take this last question, and I think we're set.
Okay. Question is whether the Fourth Amendment applies here. And yes, the Fourth Amendment does apply to unlawful searches and seizures, and that's what's been happening here, unlawful seizures of personal property, as well as a failure to provide due process because of the lack of notice or inadequate notice. So I want to thank everyone for coming today, and we look forward to the media's continued participation because we do want to be able to provide and raise awareness of the homelessness issue, and this is one vehicle in which to do so. Thank you very much.